You are standing outside right now. And it is 30 degrees colder than anything you have ever felt. Your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth. Your fingers have gone numb. There is no heater. No jacket from a store. No walls waiting for you a few steps away. This was Tuesday for your ancestors. For over 100,000 years. Humans lived through the coldest stretch this planet has seen in the last million years. And somehow, they didn't just survive it. They thrived in it. You'd think the answer is simple. Fire and fur, right? But the real story is far stranger, and far more clever than anything you learned in school. Let's go back. Around 33,000 years ago. The last ice age tightened its grip on the northern hemisphere. Glaciers a mile thick crushed across what is now Canada, Scandinavia, and northern Europe. Sea levels dropped so low that land bridges appeared where oceans used to be. Woolly mammoths grazed where London stands today. And scattered across this frozen world, small bands of Homo sapiens were figuring out how to stay alive. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Your ancestors were not living in caves the whole time, huddled and shivering. That image is mostly wrong. Archaeologist Olga Soffer, who spent decades studying Ice Age sites in Eastern Europe, found something remarkable at a site called Mazyrik in Ukraine. Homes built entirely from mammoth bones. Not sticks. Not stone. Bones. Ancient humans there stacked mammoth skulls, jaws, and leg bones into circular foundations. Sometimes using the bones of over 60 individual mammoths for a single structure. They layered hides and turf over the bone frames for insulation. Some of these dwellings had fire pits dug into the center, lined with stone to hold heat longer. This wasn't primitive desperation. This was engineering. These people were reading the landscape like a blueprint. Using the largest available resource, mammoth carcasses, as literal architecture against a climate that wanted them dead. Why does this matter to you? Because it reveals something about human problem solving that hasn't changed. When the environment gives you nothing, you don't panic. You improvise with whatever is in front of you. Sound familiar? It's the same instinct that makes you duct tape a broken zipper or use a phone as a flashlight. You inherited that. And these bone houses weren't temporary huddles. Some sites show evidence of repeated use across generations. Meaning families return to the same foundations year after year, repairing and rebuilding as needed. That's not survival by accident. That's planning. That's a group of people looking at a brutal winter still months away and deciding, right now, where they would live when it arrived. You do the same thing every time you check the weather forecast before a trip. The timescale is different. The instinct is identical. Beyond bones, some groups dug their shelters partially into the earth itself, using the ground as a natural insulator the same way an underground cellar stays cool in summer and warm in winter. Semi-subterranean pit houses, found across parts of Ice Age Europe and Siberia, kept interior temperatures dramatically more stable than anything built above ground. Combine that with a hide roof, a central fire, and a tightly packed group of bodies generating their own heat. And a shelter that looks primitive from the outside could sustain a survivable microclimate through months of sub-zero nights. Now let's talk about clothing, because this is where things get genuinely strange. For most of human evolution, our bodies were built for heat, not cold. We lost most of our body hair somewhere around 2 million years ago, likely to help us sweat and cool down while hunting on the African savanna. So how did a species built for heat survive an ice age? The answer is a hidden technological leap that almost nobody talks about. The eyed sewing needle. Around 40,000 years ago, someone in Siberia carved a needle out of bone, thin enough to pass through hide, with a small hole punched at one end for thread made from sinew. This sounds unremarkable until you understand what it made possible. Before the needle, humans could only drape hides over their bodies, loosely, with gaps everywhere heat could escape. After the needle, they could stitch fitted, layered, wind-sealed clothing. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan has argued that this single invention may have been as important to surviving the Ice Age as fire itself. Because tailored clothing meant humans could finally trap body heat efficiently enough to migrate into brutally cold territory. Think about that next time you zip up a jacket. You're using a 50,000-year-old idea. Layering mattered too. Evidence from clothing impressions and tool marks suggests Ice Age humans in the coldest regions wore multiple fitted layers. An inner layer against the skin, an insulating middle layer, and an outer windproof shell made from tougher hide. Often from animals like wolf or wolverine whose fur resists frost buildup. Later Arctic peoples, who inherited and refined these same principles, wore boots stuffed with dry grass for insulation. A trick that likely stretches back tens of thousands of years. Every piece of gear had a reason. Nothing was decorative. Every stitch was a calculation against death. And it wasn't only about staying warm. It was about staying dry. Wet skin loses heat many times faster than dry skin. Something your body still reacts to instantly today. Which is why a light rain on a cold day feels more dangerous than a dry cold itself. Ancient tailors understood this danger long before anyone had a word for hypothermia. Hides were treated, scraped, and sometimes smoked to make them more water resistant. An early form of a technology you still rely on every time you buy a waterproof coat. But clothing and shelter only solve part of the problem. You still have to eat. And in a world covered in ice, food is not growing on trees. So what did people actually eat? Mostly, meat. Enormous amounts of meat and fat. This is where things get almost unbelievable. Ice Age humans in extreme environments developed what researchers now call the fat hunger instinct. When food is scarce and temperatures are brutal, your body needs calorie-dense fuel just to generate heat. And lean meat alone isn't enough. In fact, eating too much protein without enough fat can cause a dangerous condition, sometimes nicknamed rabbit starvation by later Arctic explorers, where the body cannot process excess protein without adequate fat intake, leading to illness and death even with a full stomach. Ancient hunters knew this instinctively, even without a word for metabolism. They prized fatty organs, bone marrow, and blubber above all else. Marrow bones were cracked open and eaten first at a kill site. Nothing was wasted. Skin, sinew, and organs all had a purpose. Your ancestors weren't just hunting for meat. They were hunting for survival chemistry, balancing their diet with a precision that modern nutrition science is only now able to explain. There's a reason certain organs were treated almost like currency. Liver, brain, and bone marrow contain far more fat and essential nutrients than muscle meat, and Ice Age humans appear to have prioritized them accordingly. Some archaeological sites show mammoth long bones, split lengthwise with stone tools. The marrow scraped clean, while other parts of the carcass were left behind entirely. That's not wasteful. That's triage. When calories are the difference between living and freezing, you don't eat what's easiest. You eat what keeps you alive the longest. Storage was its own kind of genius. Without refrigeration, meat spoils fast, except when the environment itself becomes the freezer. Ice Age hunters in the coldest regions used natural cold storage, burying meat in permafrost or packing it into ice-lined pits, preserving kills for weeks or months at a time. In effect, they invented the freezer using nothing but the ground beneath their feet. When you open your own freezer tonight, you're using an idea that's tens of thousands of years old, just with a compressor instead of permafrost. And here's the twist you didn't expect. Cold itself may have shaped how your brain works today. Researcher Marta Mirazan-Lar and colleagues studying Ice Age population patterns have noted that surviving in these extremes, unpredictable environments demanded constant problem-solving, tool innovation, and cooperation between group members. Some anthropologists argue that the punishing unpredictability of Ice Age climates acted as a kind of evolutionary pressure cooker, favoring individuals and groups who could plan ahead, share resources, and adapt quickly. The very traits you use today to plan a grocery list, budget your paycheck, or prepare for a storm may be echoes of a brain shaped by ancestors who had to think several steps ahead just to survive the night. Cooperation mattered just as much as cleverness. No single person survived the Ice Age alone. Bands were small, usually under 50 people, and every member's skill mattered. The person who could track a herd for miles across snow. The person who could read the sky and predict a storm. The person who remembered where the last edible roots were buried beneath frozen ground. Survival was never an individual achievement. It was a shared inheritance of memory, skill, and trust passed between people who depended on each other completely. There's one more detail that might be the strangest of all. Ancient humans didn't just endure the cold. Some evidence suggests certain groups moved toward it, following megafauna like mammoths and reindeer deeper into frozen territory, essentially chasing their food source into harsher and harsher conditions. It sounds irrational until you realize these massive animals represent walking calorie reserves, easily insulated by their own body fat and hide. Killing one mammoth could feed a group for weeks. The risk of the cold was outweighed by the reward of the meat. So when you picture the Ice Age, stop imagining shivering cavemen waiting for the sun to save them. Picture engineers building bone houses. Picture inventors threading needles that would outlast empires. Picture nutritionists without textbooks, cracking marrow bones with surgical precision. Picture a species so relentlessly adaptable that a mile of ice covering half the planet was, in the end, just another problem to solve. You carry every piece of that ingenuity in you right now. The part of your brain that plans ahead for winter. The instinct that makes you crave rich, fatty comfort food on a cold night. The impulse to build, to layer, to protect the people around you when things get hard. None of that started with you. It started 30,000 years ago, in the snow, with people who refused to freeze. And the wildest part isn't that they survived the ice age. It's that you are still living with the mind they built to get through it.